Buon pomeriggio, good afternoon, or buonasera, good evening, depending on where you're joining from. Welcome from a Russian orphanage to a Sicilian adoptive family, Dasvidania. The title of a novel, which is at the core of our conversation today with the book's author, Nikolai Prestia. My name is Teresa Fiore. I'm the Inserra Chair in Italian and Italian American Studies at Montclair State University. And it is my pleasure to host this event and to moderate it as part of the initiatives and programs that the Inserra Endowment supports on our campus, physically and now also virtually, like today. In the next slide, I give my thanks to Mr. Inserra and his family for their generous donation that makes programs possible. It has made them possible since 2011, and all of them have been characterized by a transdisciplinary quality. We are able to invite and entertain conversations and projects with all kinds of artists and scholars. And today we are focusing specifically on literature, but once again, we're able to do something that we always do with these programs, which is concentrating and offering a view of what we call transnational Italy. That is to say, Italy in connection to other places, Italy moving to other places through migration, diaspora, colonialism, imperialism, and Italy hosting different cultures and different languages as part of a conversation about identity and belonging, which is certainly at the center of today's program. The tension between the local and the global is something that we're particularly interested in. And that tension, productive tension, is made possible also through collaborations. Every single program is always characterized by a synergy with other programs on campus, sometimes off campus, sometimes here in the United States or abroad. And speaking of collaborations, as the next slide illustrates, today actually we are officially partnering up with the Russian program at Montclair State University, which is part of the World Languages and Cultures Department, where the Inserra chair is housed, along with the Italian program, which is, of course, also hosting today's event. And in a couple of moments, I will actually leave the floor to my colleague, Jeff Gatrall. And after that, we will have the conversation with Nikolai Prestia, who will also be reading from the book, and we will have a translation of the excerpts from the novel. We will close with a Q&A where we invite you to actively participate. So please write your comments and questions in the Q&A section, not the chat, so that we can see your thoughts, your inquiries. Special thanks to Lydia Rosenberg, who for quite a while now has been behind the scenes as an engine of these virtual operations. Special thanks to Lilia Pino Blouin for her interpretation, and to Daniela Chadri Fiore for the translation of the excerpts from the novel from Italian into English. At this point, I would like to invite my colleague, Jeff, to speak. Let me give you just a little bit of information about him. He's associate professor in the Department of World Languages and Cultures as the coordinator of the Russian program, but also as the director of the Medical Humanities program, which is a fairly new program we've introduced in Montclair State that has received a lot of interest among students. And I think in a way, it is also quite relevant to today's discussion, right, Jeff?
Yes.
His research focuses on 19th century novels from Russia, Western Europe, and the United States. Is particularly interested in how modern fiction intersects with other spheres of cultural production, including indeed medicine, visual art, and religion. And his publications include articles on Chekhov and medicine, as well as articles and book chapters on Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Proust, Vasily Pelinov, and Lew Wallace. And the Russian authors, as we will see, will have a bit of a part in today's conversation. So thank you, Jeff, for joining us and for introducing us to Russia at the time when Nico was there, and in particular to the orphanage system in Russia. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much, Teresa. It's an honor to be here. I'm very happy that you invited me to collaborate tonight, and it's a privilege to be here as well to hear Nikolai Prestia, who will be reading from his novel, and very grateful for the translation. I will rely on the English translation to hear about this novel. When Teresa first asked me to present or to say a few introductory words about orphans and orphanages in Russia, Russian literature, my mind immediately jumped to the current war. Of course, we're now entering into the 4th month of the conflict. Much of the international press has very legitimately focused on migration, the millions of migrants who've been forced from their homes. Also being covered, though, are those children, Ukrainian children, who are now being left orphans due to the conflict. My mind, though, jumps not to the tragedy of the situation, but partly also to anger. If you're watching news from the Russian side of events, you also see orphans. You see stories of Russian children dying in Donbass, killed by Ukrainians, who are often called Nazis, although they are not Nazis. And that the Russian has been using orphans, not just now, but for a good century, for political purposes, in propaganda, in media. And the stories, as I said, that came to mind immediately, often fabricated, are used not to describe the tragedy of war, but to stir up warmongering in order to incite violence and war. So the propaganda as well is also used in the case of anti-Americanism. There was a very tragic incident that happened in 2011 where a Russian orphan who had been adopted by American parents outside of Washington, D.C., was left in a car for hours and died. That tragedy, again, was turned into a propaganda. In the Russian press, the story was exaggerated. Multiple other stories were fabricated, added to it. And a law was passed banning Russian children from being adopted by American parents. It is still on the books. The law is named after the child who died, Dima Yakovlev. And this use of children in propaganda, I feel I must also mention, it's also part now of this move towards a very patriarchal society. And there have been recent moves to prevent men who may in some way be suspiciously homosexual, gay, are also now being, through law, prevented from adopting children. Surrogate parents, you can no longer be a single man and have arranged a surrogate child in Russian literature. And these laws, of course, are not being designed to protect children. They're being designed to demonize different groups. So as I say, this was war is on my mind. It's been on my mind every day as I wake up. And this is sort of the things that have been in the background. But I thought actually it might be better to focus on literature. We're going to be reading about a literary orphan. And Russian literature is filled with orphan authors and orphans as main characters. And I thought we go really to the heart of Russian literature, the two most famous of Russian authors, Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, both of whom are orphans. We'll start with Tolstoy, who was born in 1821. He became an orphan at the age of 1.5 when his mother died. And in the Russian tradition, you become an orphan when one parent dies. When your both parent dies, there's a different term, the full orphanage, but you can be an orphan with just one child dying. And in Russian literature tradition, the emphasis is very often on the mother dying, and then the child being left without the mother, having perhaps memories of the mother. In the case of Tolstoy, he says he himself doesn't remember anything about his own mother, but he always built up images of her. He built this image of her as being tall and beautiful and kind. He loved to hear stories about how she would help beggars and the homeless near their estate in Yasnaya Polyana. He was also helped in his imaginary world by the fact that no portraits existed of his mother. This is the only one I was able to find online, a silhouette. And so he really was given a silhouette, a blank slate on which to project his memories, his image of his mother. His father died when he was 9. And so he was a full orphan, kruglaya sirota, as it's known in Russian. And he used this experience to depict characters who are orphans. And orphans in Russian literature are often, in the classic literature, are not going to be the street urchins you might see in Charles Dickens, Oliver Twist. They're going to be orphans in gentry families. And this is very true of Tolstoy. So Tolstoy wrote about his own, and this was the book that most came to mind when I heard about Prestia's novel, Nikolai's novel, Dasvidania, semi-autobiographical novella, Boyhood, which is part of a trilogy by Tolstoy, an autobiographical trilogy. And the hero of the novel, Nikolai Etyenev, is very much a Tolstoy-type character. He's impressionable, he's open, he's honest, he hates any conventions, things that feel false, artificial. In the novel, his mother, begins the novel with his mother being ill. His father sends him away. By the end of the novel, he comes back just to see his mother, who is dying. And this becomes a fundamental element, a sort of a rite of passage into the next novel, which is Youth. It'll end with boyhood, which his sort of early preteen years, and then his years in university. As I say, it's very semi-biographical. The boy is impressionistic, moody. We follow his internal thoughts. And for Tolstoy, orphans are often in their own thoughts, constantly thinking through problems, often in isolation, loneliness, and at some level disconnected from the world of conventions, which gives them, both puts them at a disadvantage, but also allows them to see the world always with fresh eyes, with child eyes. And Tolstoy's children, in many ways, remain children through the rest of their lives. And his characters, his orphan characters, are very often described as childlike. To move to my next slide, the most famous orphans in Russian literature, of Tolstoy's novels, that is, are both Anna Karenina and Levin, the two heroes of Anna Karenina. And this is something that unites these two characters. We have two plot lines that intersect only once. They have one brief meeting in which they clearly are kindred spirits. We see their openness to the world, their honesty, the way in which they're able to ignore the conventions and the chatter around them to get to the heart of matters. Both characters are very much part of this. It's very strange in the novel. We're actually given almost no information about their parents. We're sort of begin to see them as they're already adults. And they're very much, as I say, children, Tolstoy orphans, open to the world, suspicious of conventions, and in their own sort of loneliness. Dostoevsky was also an orphan, although in terms of personal development biography, it's not quite as fundamental as it will become for Tolstoy. Dostoevsky's mother died of consumption, as it was called in the day, tuberculosis. When he was 15, he was born 1821. Sorry, I got the dates wrong. Tolstoy is 1828. Dostoevsky's 1821. Dostoevsky's mother died when he was 15. His father died when he was 17. And his father died under suspiciously Dostoevskian circumstances. There's been lots of investigation from historical investigators, but he was an awful individual, brutal, abusive, and it seems that his peasants murdered him. And he murdered when Dostoevsky was 17. Freud wrote a very famous essay called Dostoevsky and Parricide, in which he analyzes Dostoevsky. He brings together what he thinks of as historical evidence, suggesting that Dostoevsky has his first epileptic fit shortly after his father's death, and that this is deeply subconsciously related in terms of deep traumas and so on. He's entirely wrong on the facts. The psychoanalysis is completely unconvincing. For me, it's the worst single essay ever written on Dostoevsky, but definitely this is something that it does inform his literature. One of his earliest novels, it would have been his first full novel, or his third full novel, Netishka Nismanova, is a very interesting literary experiment on the part of Dostoevsky, a story told, a coming-of-age novel, a Bildungsroman, told from the point of view of a girl who is orphaned about a third the way through the novella. She is raised in a brutal home. Her mother is murdered by her father, who's a stepfather. We already begin to see the differences between Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. We're several levels further down in the social level, and the violent episodes are much higher, and it's much more traumatic. She is adopted by a gentry family and continues in this process of open, deeply sensitive, deeply emotional characters. The name Netishka Nisvanova can be translated almost literally as the nameless nobody, the sense of absolute anonymity that comes with being an orphan. Dostoevsky, it was all written first person, female perspective. Again, it's a really interesting experiment on Dostoevsky's part. 1949, which was also the year that he's arrested for reading out a revolutionary pamphlet at a meeting, gets sent to Siberia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He never returns to the novel. It remains unfinished. But when he returns from Siberia, and we get to the period of the mature Dostoevsky in his major novels, orphans figure prominently. So among the most famous orphans in Dostoevsky are the Marmolev family. In Crime and Punishment, we have the main hero, Raskolnikov. It imagines this grand theory that the great men of the world, in order to become great and achieve greatness, are permitted to do at least one evil, one crime. That crime will be justified by their subsequent greatness. And this is sort of the imagination of the early Raskolnikov, who kills a pawnbroker. Working for the pawnbroker is Sonia Marmoledova. She is the 18, very vague on the age, but she's about 18 years old. When the pawnbroker dies, she is thrown into her family situations where she has a stepmother and a stepfather. The stepfather is a really nice man, but drunk. Her stepmother's abusive. He gets run over by a horse, dies. Her stepmother dies thereafter very quickly of essentially grief, which is a very common death in 19th century novels, dying of grief. And she is left alone with her three stepchildren. The stepchildren themselves are sent to orphanages. And I was trying to think, there aren't very many orphanages, actual orphanages, in the classic Russian novel. And we don't get to see what happens to her step siblings. But we definitely follow Sonia Marmoledova. And it will become part of Raskolnikov's gradual spiritual realization that, in fact, he can't commit a crime that doesn't have profound consequences that he can't anticipate. And the largest ones are those happening to the Marmoledova family. He eventually falls in love with her, confesses to her, and so on. I don't want to give too much of the plot, although it's among the most famous plots in Russian literature. Tolstoy put down the novel after 10 pages. He said, I already know what's going to happen. He claims he never read his rival's novel. The final novel I'd like to look at, as well as another classic example of the orphan in Russian literature. Two of the three brothers, Karamazov, Alyosha and Ivan, they are orphans from the second wife of Fyodor Karamazov. Fyodor Karamazov is, of course, alive at the beginning of the novel, will be famously murdered by one of the three or four. There's a bastard son in the background of the brothers. The mother of, we don't see the mother. The mother has died before the novel begins in the childhood of Alyosha and Ivan. Once again, the mother dies, the children are sent away. This is something common. Tolstoy was sent away, and his fictional characters are often sent away. Oh, sorry, that was Mishkin. I'm going to pass over Mishkin to get to, because I don't want to take too much time away from Nikolai. We have a famous moment, though. One of the things in Dostoevsky's novels is that his orphans do remember their mothers. They often die in the first years of their life, 3 or 4, just old enough to have early memories. And Alyosha has a famous early memory of his mother. His mother, who is crying in hysterics. He uses the word hysterics, although obviously a very gendered term. She is holding Alyosha in her arms and holding him up to an icon of the Mother of God. And this image is going to stay with Alyosha for the rest of his life. And we get to see again this imaginary, the maternal imaginary of the orphan, and it's going to preserve him. It's going to preserve him in moments of temptation, in moments of doubt. He will always have that sort of guardian spirit with his mother there. It's also, we get a sense of secondary violence. We know from elsewhere in the novel how violent the father was to his second wife. And for me, I always imagine that he's just in the other room yelling at her after an abusive episode. So Mishkin is also an orphan, and his love interest will be an orphan. They're both saved by the same patron, the same protector, making life complicated though. His protector sends the orphan Mishkin to an orphanage in Switzerland, and he seduces the other one. So again, it's always a darkness in Dostoevsky's plots. So I think I'll end there. As I say, I'm really excited to now hear a new novel written in Italian, but part of this Russian tradition of literary orphans.
Thank you so much, Jeff. What a marathon through Russian literature to actually set up the theme. And you did it actually very much in tune with a novel you haven't had a chance to read, which is indeed about being an orphan, much more than adoption, as I will explain. So I'm going to switch to Italian now, since we are going to be in conversation with Nico.
First of all, welcome, Nico, and thank you so much for having accepted our invitation to talk about your book, Dasvidania, which means see you later in Russian, and it is the title of your debut novel published by the publisher Marsilio in 2021. It is a book that has been met with positive reviews, both by the audience, by the readers and critics. There was this beautiful review by Marcello Fois for La Stampa, and then there is a wonderful radio program on the Italian public radio. We are going to refer to you as Nico, which is your nickname. It's an informal way of addressing you, but we've had so many conversations that I feel it's appropriate. We have discussed a variety of topics. Nico was born in Russia, and he lived there until he was 8. When he arrived in Italy. And in Italy, he earned a law degree, and he started his journey as a writer. I want to start off with a very simple question. And it is a question on your personal history, on your autobiography, which ends up in the book to a great extent. Therefore, I'd like to give the floor to you. This is going to be a wonderful journey, and we're going to learn about people that have had a positive impact on you. your family, your peers, and we're going to talk about the locations in which you have grown up. And there's both tragic experiences and very welcoming experiences. And we have some excerpts from your novel, so we can maybe start off with that, and then you can comment as well. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Nico. Good evening, everyone. And thank you, Teresa, for having brought me here to talk about Dasvidania. You asked me about the journey of my life. It started off in Russia, and definitely the negative component of that experience had a deep impact on my life. The absence of a father and the presence of a mother that was an uncertainty as such, and then going over various institutions or orphanages. This led me to an idea that I thought was going to be negative forever. And then over time, it turns into a hope and an opportunity. In Russia, there were people that have helped my sister and I, Babushka Faya, an aunt who was a person who understood the situation that we were in. And then the director, Nikolai, who was the first father figure I had. He was the first adult who didn't generate any fear in me. I didn't see any risk in him. Another very important film was Katusha, the nurse, who I think mirrors the impossibility of escaping the reality in which one is born. Friendships have been fundamental within the orphanage to be able to understand how it works, how one can live as part of a group. And friendship was the first form of defense against the kind of abuse that characterizes orphanages. And then over time, we lost our mother, and we were adopted by an Italian couple who took us to Sicily. Their names were Nicoletta and Benedetto. Our lives radically changed. Our social environment changed. They gave us education and they taught us the rules to function within society. And this had an impact on our journey. And therefore, there's a lot of options. There was the hardship that I came from, but then I learned resilience. I went through anxiety and depression. And as I was going through those experiences, I started writing, and writing filled my days. And I was able to put on paper everything that I couldn't explain to myself. And having become familiar with other realities allowed me to understand that there was a different way. I had friends who were studying literature, and so by talking to these friends, I understood that there were people that dreamt of becoming writers, and there was a kind of competition that came out, and I started getting myself involved with this kind of writing at university level when I was in college. And the meeting that characterizes the book, Dasvidania, is the meeting with the director, Roberta Torre, who saw something in my writing, and she put me in touch with Clara Valerio, who is a great writer, and she is in charge of a collection at Marsilio Editori. Chiara deeply appreciated my way of writing, and I succeeded in publishing this book. So the journey of writing this book was challenging. It is a debut novel. It was the result of a lot of work, and a lot of people trusted me and allowed me to express myself, especially regarding the painful parts. So I really want to thank my editor, who is also a great writer. So this is the journey that I went through. So you mentioned the orphanage. You mentioned a hospital. Can you talk about these experiences? There were multiple experiences in institutions and they were very strong. Can you elaborate on that? Yes, the orphanage was a very, very hard experience, and it lasted overall 3.5 years over a number of institutions. One realized that one didn't have a father and a mother, and this is a very sad kind of awareness. The hospital was a shorter experience, luckily, but it was very challenging because it confirmed to me when I was 6 or 7 that I was alone in the world. Because in the first hospital, all the other children had their own bed, and then there was a mother next to them, and I didn't have anybody else. So this is when I realized that I was different. So the hospital for me meant extreme solitude or loneliness. And on top of the pain that I had because I was in the hospital. The second experience was tough. I was there for about 15 days. It was in a psychiatric ward. I had sleep issues because, as I explained in the book, a family had an opportunity to adopt just my sister. So I knew that we were alone in the world, but then the reality of being divided from my sister is something that had morally or psychologically killed me. And so I ended up in this institution where I experienced loneliness again, a very challenging kind of loneliness. And therefore, they were challenging experiences for a child. But now, many years have gone by, and one always learns something from negative experiences. And I've gained a lot of awareness. I saw that I was able to be alone in certain situations, and that doesn't scare me anymore the way it did when I was a child. I understood that one still goes ahead and people figure things out. Your book talks about these places and about these people, and above all, on your perspective, a child's perspective, the narrator that you have created. Therefore, it is not a book on adoption as such. It is a book on the experience of a family uneasiness, a family challenge, and then life in the hospital. I was wondering why you chose to talk about this part of the story. Your life has been much longer than those 8 years, and yet you've decided to define this time limit within the book. And thinking about the questions that people ask to adoptive families, in particular adoptive parents, and they say, well, do you know anything about the parents? Are the parents alive? Did you take them from an orphanage? Where did they live before? So what does this book do to answer these kind of questions, to satisfy this kind of curiosity? Is it something that came or stemmed from the desire to change this register to have an impact on this approach? Yes, definitely. There is this function, and it is seen with a deeper level of maturity. Many people who adopted children or adopted children themselves have commented on this book, saying that it does have this function. The main reason why I wrote Dasvidania was that I wanted to put in writing all the memories I had from Russia, and I wanted to rationalize them, and I wanted to see whether little by little, by writing, there would be more memories that would bubble up. So it was an attempt to sum up my life in Russia and put down my memories on paper. But something that prompted me is that I think it's important to become aware about situations that are not classically part of daily life in quote unquote bourgeois society, experiences that are generally characterized part of the experience of the poorest and most neglected part of society. This is something that happened to me, but could have happened to anybody else. And therefore, I want to raise people's awareness about these social dynamics, about these realities, about these experiences. Okay, therefore, it is a memory-based process. So there's a desire not to forget, which is a great fear, in particular when there are such radical experiences. One has the feeling that the past could become too dim, could dematerialize, so to speak. And then on the other hand, there's a denunciation. There's a way of reporting what happens. You talk about the public spaces and the opportunities for dialogue. I also wanted to dwell on the relationship between autobiographical writing, and that is fixating on memories, and then novel writing or coming of age stories and poetry. I follow you on Instagram and you publish poems all the time. And once you told me that poems are the first form of writing that children use when they want to write. And therefore, I was wondering whether this is where you started off. This is something that you were doing when you were a child, and the children, you're right, children have a lot of imagination, and I am good with imagination. You already mentioned that your journey as a writer was of a different kind, but I was interested in understanding the relationship between all these forms. Regarding poetry, it is definitely a an immediate form of communication. It's a free form kind of writing. And there is the opportunity to give more meaning to words by creating a rhythm or a mood, which can communicate a lot more compared to prose. And I think I have written so many poems. Sometimes I look at what I've written, and I think I've written 1,300 or 1,400 poems. Sometimes I have an app and I look at them. So I started out with poetry. And in Siena, once I was reading my poems, and the kids that were listening to me in the school didn't get them. And by that, I mean that it was too short. It would give them a glimpse. It was a challenge, but it didn't go any further. So that's how in 2015, I decided to move to prose writing in the form of stream of consciousness. That's how I started out. But then I realized that it is not something that a reader who has not shared the same experience would not be able to understand that. So I needed to turn that into a novel which is autobiographical, and you do need to create limits, and you need to make experiences understandable by the reader so that the reader can be involved. So the relationship between autobiography and novel writing is this, using a language that is lighter, simpler to convey emotions, and to allow the reader to say, okay, this is a true experience, but it is also a novel. And so when the reader is faced with situations that can be very harsh, they can escape, they can have some distance from them, and they can escape, so to speak. That's how I see it. Okay, why don't we look at the beginning of the novel? Let's ask Nico to read them. And Nico, if you want, you can step away a little bit so that we can see you more. We can see more of your face. Okay, so this is the beginning of the novel, which will allow us to understand more about what you've just discussed with us. this last sentence is very interesting. Kola was me, Kola is me. And then you switch from the third person to the first person. It is a very interesting approach, which characterizes a lot of writing. But actually, in the world of people who lose their parents and then find themselves with new parents and new family, the issue of invention and fiction and the relationship with authenticity is particularly sharp or particularly vibrant. I'm thinking about a statement by Janet Winterson, a writer, that says, as adopted children, we are always self-invented because we have no more choice. We don't have any other option. So I wonder to what extent you have dealt with other writers who have written about adoption. I'm thinking about Il treno dei bambini by Viola Ardone and La Reminuta by Donatella Di Pierantonio, both published by Einaudi in 2019. And in general, this is a device in literary creation. So how does it manifest itself in the case of adoption? And you've already hinted at it, but I'd like to ask you to elaborate on that. So the books you mentioned are books I am familiar with, and in particular, the one by Viola Ardone. And they did not have that much of an impact on me. In terms of adoption, it is something that has had a sort of a parallel impact in terms of what we're discussing. And I'm thinking about Baudelaire and the fact that he lost his father, and then the mother married an officer who's very strict, and he feels a need to let go because he feels very emotionally challenged. And the stepfather is really difficult to live with, and he sees the little shell as a problem. There's a very negative approach, and this is something that prompts him to talk about his uneasiness. So this is something that inspired me. Definitely this ability to write about pain is something that led me to write Dasvidania, even though in the actual writing in the book, in terms of the ability to express pain in few short sentences, is something that was shown by me, to me by Daniele Mencarelli, who talks about pain, emotional pain, really well. He talks about the impact of one's mood on themselves, on the writing. And so these are the authors that have had an impact on me. Jeff talked about Dostoevsky and about his father's death, and we don't know very well under which circumstances he died. And there's talk about him have been killed by the servants, the weakest people. And Dostoevsky had been impacted by his father's choices to a great extent. So these writers use writing to express their emotional struggle. I don't know if I've expressed myself well. Oh, yes, you did. Absolutely. You talked about the interwoven biographical experiences that then are reflected or in writing. the first thing I do when I approach a book by somebody that I am not familiar with is find out what this person has experienced. I want to know about the biography of the writer, and I want to be influenced by the person's story, because I think there is a strong pain that somebody lives as a child, and then this becomes a diamond. I was thinking about Fabrizio De André, who says that it is manure that you have good flowers, whereas from diamonds, there is nothing that can be created. In terms of influences, as far as style goes, you have a very dry style, a very essential style, and there's a lot of parallels that can be found in literature. You have been compared to De Amicis, who is really high on melodrama, and it's very unlike what you do. And then on the other hand, I was thinking about neorealism. I was thinking about the movies of the post-war period, with the children and despair as protagonists. It was a destructive period, and as Jeff mentioned, the war has children as its main victims, but then children are capable of finding resources and creativity, and they do get by. So I was wondering if in general there were other forms of expression that have an impact in your writing, and in general, if you have a literary model in terms of having a direct style. Yes, but it is very atypical. And by that, I mean that there's something I will talk about in a moment. And I live in a very good family. We are well off financially. I was able to be educated. But compared to Russia, I still feel the need to look at the challenges of society, to look at the bad part of society. And so the characteristic of my writing is this melancholic approach. And I'm thinking about the group, The Strokes, which is formed by kids that are part of the bourgeoisie or middle class, but they try to talk about the bad part of life. They talk about the dark sides of middle class life. In terms of cinema, I was thinking of Inception by Nolan. And in terms of the ability to keep dreaming, to keep memories alive. So to do that, I need writing.
And so thinking of the paintings, your novel shows different moments as if they were paintings, and it's able to photograph nature, the nature that you can see from a window, from, inside looking at a window. It is your way to look at the world and to create borders for the world that you can see. And the image that recurs more often, it's that of the apple. And it's very interesting. On the children's train, there is also an apple. There is something about the apple, something that, in English, it's the object that is used to describe the first letter of the alphabet. We say A as an apple. You say the apple of my eye. See someone very dear to you. There are different symbols that you've chosen in your book. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about this apple and the role that it has. So here, as I was preparing the slides, it was impossible not to think of this painting. Yeah, I think it's very meaningful that you thought of Magritte, because when I wrote Dasvidania, I was very interested in art, and I went from Van Gogh, that I felt became very commercial and people were not thinking of his true pain. And I became obsessed with Magritte. I saw a documentary on Rai number 5, the channel in Italy. And this documentary was about Magritte's life. And he had a very bad experience with his mother. The idea that he carried the veil that covered his mother's face on his paintings. So, you know, maybe you can use that also as a symbol that the apple. So we didn't even need to talk about it. Magritte came up by itself almost. So definitely there is an influence from him, but also from the reading of the exchanges between Theo and Vincent van Gogh. Those few lines in which he was describing things, describing as feelings, that was really the images that I had more clearly in mind when I was describing sunsets and melancholy. And the apple reminds people, reminds you of your mother. Yes, it's a symbol of the last meeting, of which we will talk before the end of this meeting. So you talk about expressing and translate in words. Your book is written in Italian, which is your main language, if not the only one for you right now, because you lived with Russian for 8 years of your life. So in a way, this book is also a translation, an unaware translation, so to speak. Is Russian a forgotten language, a lost language? what is your relationship with this other language? Well, my relationship with that language is basically non-existent. My sister and I basically decided almost we decided to forget it. We had to learn Italian quickly. So the relationship at this point with Russian, it's I would love to know it, but I don't. So it's a pretty sad feeling. I wish I hadn't forgotten it. Maybe I can pick it up again, but it can also remind me of many situations that I escaped from. So I'm not sure, but it would be great in order to read the Russian authors such as Dostoevsky. It is always the mother. The mother, I think, is masterwork. It's so fascinating that the literature in translation reconnects you with this language that is no longer there, but of course is there somewhere. It must be there. The last excerpt that we chose for today is related to your adoptive parents. And it ends basically with the beginning of the adoption process. And it refers to your mother, Ina. And we thought it was extremely interesting because that's exactly what the novel does, reconnect the past with the present, and also describe what kind of rite of passage represents for you. But I'd like you to comment on adoption in general without delving too much in your individual experience. There are people that live in Italy and the United States and have two different perspectives. We could see two different approaches. Here, often people talk about transracial adoption or transcultural adoption, because we are in a country that always thinks about racial issues and the issue of moving from one place to another, from a culture to another. But there is also a class component that in your book is extremely important. And so these children, even in the novels that were quoted by Jeff, it's a passage from a very, very harsh, underprivileged situation to a situation that is very wealthy, and everything is easy in a way. So what is adoption? We may want to take it out of a so-called pietism readings and redefine it. Also, thanks to the experience you had.
So all of these characters that meet each other. This is not the sequence that is used in the book, but we thought it would be interesting to put them near each other because they truly represent what happened to you with your adoption, which is a concept that has changed for you over time. Yes, it certainly did. There's the part of altruism. And at the same time, there's also a special attention in my case when I think about the adoption that happened at the end of the 90s and the beginning of the year 2000. In Italy, people were adopting children from Eastern Europe, and there was a cultural component to this kind of adoption. And I was wondering why that was, and I've given myself an answer which is very racist. There would be a lot more adoptions if the journey was easier at a bureaucratic level, but both because of what happens in the adopting countries and in the countries of adoption, the situation is complex. Definitely adoption could have a bigger role in society if the condition of children in institutions was more well known, and if people knew about how challenging their experiences are. people who are adopted do leave something behind. And I am afraid that the experiences that children live are very degrading and have a long-lasting impact. And definitely situations such as those of the war can only have a negative impact on this. Often there is a socioeconomic component, and adoption programs are decided by the political interests at play at any given time. I see questions in the chat that are very timely. Ferraro says, in Sicily in the 90s, we have a lot of children that came from Russia. When you were growing up with your sister, were you able to interact with other children who had similar experiences compared to yours? Do you think that meeting other loneliness examples in terms of children, can it help you to understand yourself better? No, I did not meet any other kids adopted from Russia. However, I did have a close friendship with a young boy who lived in Memphis, in my own little town, who was adopted by a couple.
So maybe had I met more people that were adopted, then I would definitely have had this would have allowed me to have a dialogue and would have influenced also the friendship in a positive way. Do you think that the book could also have this function in creating this exploration with this other kid and also the experience in the orphanage? Well, I think that there were two functions. The first one, that it's not necessarily connected to that, but to the possibility of telling something through other experiences. So telling stories, and not to be ashamed of the experiences that you've had in your life. The other function could be that of making you more sensitive and you know, make you have an interest in adopting children. This could have a part in making an interaction or creating a campaign, an awareness campaign on this theme, or making this theme more known. I see that there's someone else who wrote in the chat. It's an anonymous person who says, I was born and grew up in the USA. I lost my mother. Nobody called me an orphan, but everybody would say you need to be independent and strong. And then I moved to Italy and everybody would call me the little orphan, and everybody was in shock that I was an orphan. And can you speak of your status as an orphan? I think that there is a history. Of course, somebody helped her, but the American system, in a way, pushes people to be strong, to be independent, and the Italian cultural environment instead creates us more interested in creating empathy. We don't want to create stereotypes, but clearly there is a cultural difference here. Yes, based on this thing, Yes, of course, America pushes you to be self-determined, to grow up. In Italy, I think, but it's just my impression, I know a few adopted children, also based on Dasvidania and the way it was received. I think that the adoptions in Italy, those who adopt children know how to take care of the children. They know what their social function has to be. And so they know how not to make them feel alone. But of course, you know, in Italy, the concept of family is a very healthy concept, and people work a lot towards this. So I read this question, and probably in Italy, you are a bit more protected, a bit. Of course, it depends on every individual situation, specific social context as well. But maybe people have a different awareness of the absence of a family that in Italy is seen as a void, while in the United States, since the individual has a more central role, then the most important part is the individual, not the family. So we are close, we're getting closer to the conclusion. Two other questions for you. Adopted people are always seen as people that must receive, but I have the idea that adopted people have a lot to offer. And so there's a perspective on the world that is offered because there are always, you have in a way more eyes to look at reality. So this can basically turn upside down the reality. So I'm turning things upside down and ask you, what would you like to adopt? I'm not talking about, you know, children. I'm talking about ideas. And I know that you are very sensitive to the young people work issues. And I follow you on Instagram. I know that you often write about this, and also the institutions. So I'm wondering, what would you like to embrace to adopt? Well, I am very aware that I was extremely lucky to go from abandonment to a full embrace. I think this was also a question of luck. I was lucky. I didn't have anything. A child, an 8-year-old child, I didn't have anything of what I saw later and I had later. I would like to do a lot of social work in a way. I'm very careful to the hot subjects within society, all the situations of disadvantaged people that now are well, but they can lose their job and just be thrown out in the street, and they're not able to produce any longer, and they become a nothing. So what I'm writing now, I hope it's connected as much as possible to these dynamics, to these social dynamics, dynamics of difficulty and, you know, underprivileged people. Because oftentimes the people that you see are the same person that was sleeping in a 5-star hotel or in the station, in the train station. It's the same person. So in a way, I would like to focus my writing on the individual. The individual is a person regardless of the social context. And so, you know, you can be wealthy and you develop some wishes and you succeed and you can talk about things and you can help evaluate people regardless of their social status and on the way they are seen. So this is something that I've seen in your book and also on the social media in which you express yourself. I can see that there is this attention to continuity in the growth as an individual. And your writing is also an opportunity to reflect on the on all of the the issues that present themselves, especially for a child like you were before being adopted. But of course, your Dasvidania is not just a story of a disadvantaged child in Russia, but it talks about an existential disadvantaged situation. So there is one quote: you never say goodbye to a book. You always say Dasvidania, so see you back soon. Yeah, I would like to write a lot. I have a project. I'm thinking about it. I'm mulling on it. I'm already working on the third project, which will deal on the will deal with people, the forgotten people by society. We'll see. We'll see. It will depend on many things, but I'm working. We hope that we will be able to read you again soon, maybe in more than one language. So break a leg. It was really a pleasure to talk to you. And I really wish that the conversation will continue and will be an opportunity to exchange ideas amongst all the circles that embrace the theme of adoption and all the themes that are dear to your heart. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you to all the people that have been with us. Before closing, I'd like to say a couple of things about what Inserra has done and will be doing soon. Inserra is on the social, on Instagram, on Facebook, but we have also a YouTube channel, and this will be published there in a week or so. You can also see the other meetings, the other webinars that we had in the past and everything that we've done so far, and the vision on Italy and with Italy in order to overcome the national borders and open a dialogue between different cultures. So very soon, we will have a program for a high school It's an initiative that is totally unique in the United States, which will allow the possibility of moving from high school to university in Italian. We are suggesting this program for people that really want to refine their Italian, that want to spend 3 weeks with us on campus and want to get a taste of life on a university campus. And then they will go back to school, to their high school, and then start their university adventure. They will have meetings with researchers, artists. We've had meetings with chefs. We will visit also museums, and there are so many experiences. I can't invite everyone to this program because it is only dedicated to high school students. But in the next academic year that will start in the fall, we will have a lot of initiatives. And I want to thank you all for being with us. And I want to wish you the best for this coming summer that we hope will give you a lot of serenity, even though life is difficult for all of us. Thank you. Thank you all. Bye-bye, Nico. It was really a pleasure. Thank you for being with us.